Namaskar, my dear friends, and a very happy new year to all of you. Welcome back to my channel. I hope all of you are doing very well, and I certainly hope that 2021 is going to be better for all of us, all around the world. And I really hope you're staying safe because the problem is not yet solved. Today, I'm back here with another Tabla tutorial. This is more of a tutorial which is rhythm based because today's topic is apps, and by apps I mean tabla apps or lehra apps, basically Indian classical music accompaniment apps that we get on the phone, which all of us have, and most of us use while practicing. Now today's video is because primarily a lot of you have been asking me about whether it is advisable to use these apps for practicing, whether that actually helps to develop your music or not. And the answer is yes and no, but I will get slightly more into the details of why, what the advantages are of these apps and what the disadvantages are, because all of these things, have both sides. So let's get started. The one thing that I have to say before anything else is that when we are practicing tabla or we are practicing vocal or sitar, Indian classical music essentially, we are practicing a music form, a genre of music which is first of all classical, second of all extremely human and organic. Okay, so this music is about interaction between two musicians or three musicians, and the interactions between human beings is something that cannot exactly be replicated by a machine. Now, why I say this is because if you're a vocalist and you are playing, you are singing with a tabla player, both of you are human, there is a common energy that is created in the room that you are performing in, and there is a kind of wavelength that develops between two artists, two musicians. And based on that energy, the interactions happen and the music develops. In other words, we make the music develop and grow together. We're both, like as a tabla player and a vocalist in the room, we're both responsible for making this happen. When there are two human beings playing together, there is always going to be the factor of human error. And by human error, what I mean is that none of us are absolute metronomes or click tracks that are driven by a machine. We're not clocks. We have a sense of rhythm, and we have a sense of dividing beats up into a certain number of cycles and presenting them in a musical way. But we will never be absolutely exact in terms of how an app will be, or how a click track or a metronome will be. So what happens is, as an artist, as a performer, when you go and perform, you are always going to perform with another human being. You're not actually going to play with an app on stage or in a musical setting. So it is important for every artist, whether you're a vocalist or a sitar player or a tabla player, to be able to anticipate and understand the error factor, the error margin that is going to happen as a result of all the musicians in the setting being human. So what is important to understand in this situation is that we will always have to adjust and take into consideration that there is going to be a slightly, it shouldn't be an error which is of such a magnitude that it cannot be. I'm not talking about an error which is of displacing whole beats at a time. The error margin is probably going to be very minimal if you're playing with an appropriate and a well-trained musician, but nonetheless there will be an error. So that is one of the reasons why an app is probably not something, and this is a statement that is going to be key in this tutorial. I am not saying that there is something wrong with practicing with an app, because of course when you're practicing, an app is a reference. It will give you a reference, for example a teen tal teka or a lehra. It will give you a reference to what that beat is, and you can try it out. You can practice and you can work out things with that. But my, I guess my opinion on this matter is that you should probably not get dependent on an app. Why I say dependent is because of two things. One is that if you are constantly concerned about being absolutely correct on time and syncing up with the app, actually synchronizing with the app is the word I'm looking for, um, then one of the things that may happen is that you might lose focus, or your concentration might shift from the actual core musicality of what you're playing, and from there your focus can shift towards um, being perfectly on time every time around, and adjusting to that. So it's always a time game that happens, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but this is something that I've felt from a musical and a rhythmic point of view. These Lehra and Tabla apps is to guide you in a rhythmic way. So essentially there is nothing wrong with using a Tanpura app, because a Tanpura essentially is a drone, and even on stage, if you have a live Tanpura player, that Tanpura player is also going to play the Tanpura in a loop, which is what the Tanpura is. So but the accompaniment apps is what I'm talking about. Here what happens is, because we have a lehra, or we have a theka going on, uh, we are referring to that constantly, and as a result of that, sometimes what happens is our awareness of where we are in the tal, in the time cycle, what matra we are on, is a little compromised, and we may tend to not pay attention to that because something is guiding us. Especially for tabla players, what happens is, this is something that I've had many discussions with other tabla players as well, and Kathak dancers, of course. Those of you who use Lehra apps, what happens is that we get used to the melody. We start, pointing out or landmarking certain areas of the melody, and that guides us. And that particular, like a particular note in the Lehra, will tell us where we are in that melody, and we become dependent on that. Now, why that is another problem is because when you perform, you may have to perform with different lehras, different rags, different melodies which sound different. And sometimes what happens is, if we get too used to playing with one particular lehra or one particular melody, one particular way, then as soon as that melody is changed, or the note, there's a variation in the note, we get thrown off. What happens is that as musicians, like for example, if you're a vocalist and you're singing something, what, as a tabla player, I am not going to just play in the entire concert. There are going to be little variations that I will do to enhance the performance that I'm in, and they may be a little mukra here and there, or a little uttan that comes into place and brings the theka back and flows with the music, etc., etc. And what happens is, I'm embellishing the music. But this is what brings me back to the point. If you are so dependent and so used to practicing only with apps and tabla, the tablas or whatever, I don't know all the names, but you're used to playing only with the exact same theka throughout the performance. So the minute you're actually in a situation where you're playing with a live musician, if he changes the theka, or does a little flourish here, or a little embellishment somewhere, and improvises, what happens is, it might throw you off. And that is something that I have heard from several musician friends of mine. The same thing with a lehra player. If I have a great lehra player, that lehra player is going to improvise notes in certain places. And so what I'm saying is, essentially, it is very important that I know, as a musician, as a vocalist, instrumentalist, or tabla player, or dancer, that I know where I am in that tal at any given moment. That is really of paramount importance. So I guess at the end of saying all this, I would have to say that the other reason is that all over the world, in every aspect of life, technology and machines are coming and replacing human beings, and that can be a sad thing, for us. So I guess my appeal to you would be, don't replace musicians completely. I mean, of course, use apps whenever you need that reference. And, it's not, I mean, especially in this entire pandemic, it's difficult to get people together. So, using the help of apps is not, a detrimental thing or a bad thing, a negative thing. But, my request would be, or my, I guess, advice to you would be, you should try to strike a healthy balance between playing with actual musicians, which is, the more you can do, the better, because eventually you'll be playing with musicians. And whenever you don't have the luxury or the circumstance to have a musician over, and you want to check and you want to keep going, I mean, by all means, if the app helps you, go ahead. But at the same time, for tabla players especially, I would say that when you're playing a tal, try to, if possible, try to keep the count in your head. Okay, because when you're going to play with an instrumentalist or a vocalist or a dancer, that person is not going to play a lehra with you. When you are the accompanist, he's going to improvise, and it is your duty to keep time and keep the tal intact. So in order to be able to do that at any given point, you have to know where in the tal you are. The other thing that I must mention, especially for tabla players, is that if you're playing with a sarod player or a sitar player or a vocalist, they are going to play bandishes. They're not going to play lehra. So the difference, I mean, what I'm trying to say, the difference between a lehra and a bandish is that a bandish is not necessarily a straight cut time guiding composition. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, a lehra would be so a lehra is designed to keep time with you and show you every beat clearly. That is how a lehra or a nagma is designed compositionally from a musical point of view. But when a sarod player or a melody player or a vocalist plays with you, they're going to play beautiful bandishes, which are sometimes really complicated, and most of them are definitely not, every beat assigned to one note. So you cannot afford, as a tabla player, you cannot afford the luxury of getting dependent on something that is giving you straight notes, one note per beat, and so on, because you are going to have to accompany people. As a tabla player, 70% of your job is accompanying other musicians, right? So in that situation, they are going to play bandishes, and even when you are soloing as a tabla player, when you are soloing in the context of a classical recital, your guiding light is going to be the bandish that your artist, your co-artist, has chosen to play. So if the bandish is complicated, you're going to have to still be absolutely sure of where you are in the tal, in spite of that bandish doing its complexities in between. So there again, if you're dependent on an app, that may become a problem. So that is my 2 cents on using apps and practicing. By all means, go ahead and use it for your reference to make sure you're doing something perfectly, but make it a habit to play with real musicians, because ultimately that's what you're going to do. And eventually, the more you do that, the better you will get at actually having to do it in the setting of a performance. Okay, thank you so much for staying with me on this tutorial. I am continuing with my tabla online classes, and the details are given below. If you find my tutorials useful, please hit the subscribe button and share it with your friends, and I will see you very soon again with another tutorial video. Thank you.